We are joined on the phone today by Jeff Springer. He is the great nephew of the one and only Mrs. Elva Miller. Yes, Mrs. Miller has got a new album out, believe it or not. It's called A Christmas Gift from Mrs. Miller and Other Stocking Stuffers. Hey, Jeff, how's it going today?
Good.
Thanks a lot for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's interesting to talk about. So.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about the new Mrs. Miller album, A Christmas Gift from Mrs. Miller and Other Stocking Stuffers. Can you tell the listeners a bit about it?
Yeah, it's been I've been let me start again. Well, I'm great nephew of Mrs. Miller, and through the family I've just known of her story for years, and then I started researching more about what had happened. And so over the last 20 years or so, I've always been like looking for television show appearances and possibly thinking about making a documentary, and did a website about her. And so and through that process had found some new recordings had popped up that were saved from the earthquake that she was in Northridge, California. So that they kind of were tucked away in the back of family garages and things. So found some recording tapes from some early sessions in the early '60s, and then found an acetate of Blue Velvet, and then also had some of the 45s that she released in 1971. So we decided to kind of put those all together into an album. And since we had so much Christmas stuff, it was nice to kind of organize it around a Christmas theme.
Yeah, the story of how all this came together is incredible. Just kind of finding things here and there. And, it's been 50 years, I think, almost, since the last Mrs. Miller official album. I mean, why was now the right time to get these songs out there?
Well, I mean, we wanted to get it for Christmas, so that time of the year. But yeah, it kind of finally came together. So it's something that I've been working on for the last few years, but it took a long time to get the tapes transferred, because I wanted to do it professionally, and so there wasn't any danger of them being destroyed. And so it just took a long time to get there. But yeah, I'm not. There wasn't any particular reason why this year, in particular. Maybe after a hard 2020, everyone needs a little Mrs. Miller.
Well, it's amazing the resurgence in popularity Mrs. Miller has had over the years. As far as you know, it sounds like this is probably the absolute last stuff to be released from her, or is there maybe more stuff out there?
I mean, there's some other stuff. I mean, I do have other stuff. Yeah, whether we would do another album, I'm not sure. So, I mean, Justin Martell from Ship to Shore Phono Company has expressed interest in doing more. So, yeah, perhaps there will be more in the future.
Awesome. Again, Jeff Springer is with us. He is the nephew of the great Mrs. Miller, and we're talking about the new album, A Christmas Gift from Mrs. Miller and Other Stocking Stuffers. Jeff, can you tell us a bit about, having Mrs. Miller as an aunt? Did you know much about her fame, I guess, when you were growing up?
No, not. I didn't really. She wouldn't really talk about it too much. I mean, I heard a lot of it from my mom, who had actually lived with her during high school. So my mom had driven her to the Does Her Thing recording sessions and the photo shoot for the infamous album cover with the green brownies, and then but a lot of her time, even her fame was a bit elusive, and even my mom would talk about how she would just be watching TV and suddenly she was on the Tonight Show, and so she wouldn't really talk about it too much. And so when we would go see her when I was a kid, I would bring it up, but she rarely would talk about it too much, and I'm not sure why. I don't think that she was like ashamed of it or anything. I think that it was just something that was in the past for her. So
Yeah, it is incredible to think, you go from singing in church, kind of as a hobby, to suddenly being on the Billboard charts, hanging out with Ed Sullivan. It's a crazy series of events, the way things unfolded for her.
oh yeah, I mean, no, it was a quick yeah, amazing 18 months or so. I'm sure that it was, especially with her background coming from Kansas, and being out in Claremont, and then suddenly she's traveling around, going to Hawaii and New York, and all these places. So, and there was a lot of talk about just Lois Block, who was Fred Bach, who was her arranger, would travel with her often, and she would talk about how, when they went to New York, it was just like how they had been once before, but it was just like a totally new experience. So I think, yeah, I think but it was also, I think she really enjoyed it all.
Well, and I've read the stories of how the record label maybe purposely kind of set her up to maybe sabotage some of the recordings or make her sound bad in the studio. And I guess I understand that's why a lot of people might have liked her music, but I always felt bad when I read stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there was, she said that they would speed things up or take a first take or things like that. So, yeah, it was. I mean, I think it was. There was a lot of humor at her expense, especially in the beginning. But I think that she kind of embraced the joke to some extent as time went on, and so I think that she really did enjoy like entertaining a crowd, and so. So yeah, I think it was enjoyable for her.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about her character, being a good sport about that. And, even after she became kind of wise to what was going on. But, after she retired from the music business, it seems like she didn't miss a beat, as you mentioned, just kind of sort of went right back to the life she had led before the fame, and it just kind of went on and didn't really mention it all that much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she really enjoyed going to, see music, and so, and that those are the years I remember her, so I think that, yeah, her life went on, and I mean, she lost her husband during those years, but, so she was a bit alone, but that's why we would go visit her a lot and everything. So my mom was very close to her, and so we would drive out and spend the day with her quite a bit. So, but yes, I think she's just an incredibly generous person, and was always there for family and everything. So.
Well, Jeff, could we see anything else, maybe from Mrs. Miller in the coming years? I know I've heard there was a film in the works, or, maybe like a DVD of her TV show appearances or anything like that. Could we see something like that come out?
Yeah, I could see something like that. I mean, I've put a lot of work into, I make documentaries, so I was always interested in doing something about her, but it's just, licensing that kind of footage is a bit tricky and expensive, so it's hard to know that unless you have a budget up front that you can actually finish the project. So, but the process I've gone through is just, I've gotten a lot of, different, whether it be photos or TV show appearances or different things from her. So I'm hoping that there's maybe something else to do with that kind of stuff. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this album does.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great that all this stuff is being compiled and you're keeping her legacy going. And obviously with YouTube and how so many people have access to things nowadays, you could never have another Mrs. Miller. So it was definitely a very interesting time in our history for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, Jeff, you mentioned being a filmmaker. What's next for you? Is there anything else in the works that we should be looking out for?
Very, very different stuff. I'm working on a movie about freestyle kayakers in Georgia, and I just most recently had done a film about semi-aquatic rodents in Louisiana, and so like an environmental horror film in a way. So called Rodents of Unusual Size. So yeah, very different than the Mrs. Miller story, but yeah, well, but I'm hoping that there's some way that can tell this story on film.
Well, where's the best place to go if the listeners want to hear about some of this other stuff you got going on?
I have a website, jeffspringer.com, that you could check out. But yeah, and yeah, I think that's probably the best. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, the new Mrs. Miller album, A Christmas Gift from Mrs. Miller and Other Stocking Stuffers, is out, and it definitely looks great, and it's great to have a lot of this stuff that I've kind of read exists, but obviously maybe a handful of people have the copies, and now it can be out there for all the fans, and it's definitely great that you got this all put together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even for me, there's a mention of the Blue Velvet recording in a book, and so it was out. The kind of the information was kind of out there, and then when it finally popped up, and it was something in the Blue Velvet popped up way later, and this is only like a few years ago, and so it was just a really unexpected thing to happen. And so you read about these things, and then suddenly like, oh, there's the recording. So it's been quite a journey for me, reading about some of these things, and then you finally get to hear them or see them.
Definitely. Well, I'm sure Mrs. Miller is proud of you, and definitely we're excited for this new album. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And again, that was Jeff Springer, the nephew of the late, great Mrs. Miller. And her new album, A Christmas Gift from Mrs. Miller and Other Stocking Stuffers, is available now.